When he was a boy, the king had found a wolf cub. For years he raised it with care, and the wolf grew into a magnificent beast that obeyed only his voice. Then one day, the wolf became a man, broad-shouldered and severe, with eyes of a startling, cold blue that were always fixed upon the king. The Lord Regent, Caleb Thorne, entered the royal bedchamber without ceremony, his sword drawn. The polished steel caught the flickering candlelight, its tip tracing a cold line across the king's cheek. He declared the beast a blight upon the kingdom, a creature that enchanted the monarch and had to be purged. Julian met his gaze without flinching. A faint smile touched his lips as he asked if the blade was meant for the wolf, or for him. Caleb did not answer. He sheathed his sword, his fingers replacing the cold steel against Julian's skin. His voice was a low murmur, a command disguised as a plea for him to be reasonable. Julian was a king, crowned at 10 years old when his father passed. Caleb Thorne became Lord Regent, his tutor in the art of rule. Caleb was one of the few lords in the kingdom not of royal blood, a man who had earned his title through sheer force of will and battlefield acumen. From Julian's earliest memories, Caleb was a constant presence, guiding his hand in matters of state. The Queen Mother, secluded in her own wing of the palace, had often warned him to be wary. Once Julian was strong enough, she had said, a man like Caleb could not be allowed to remain. The regent's care for him had been absolute. Caleb had taught him his letters, dressed him, and adjusted his coronet. He had tasted his food for poison and tested his medicine for ill intent. During the winter hunt of his 10th year, assassins struck. In the chaos of snow and blood, with his guards falling around him, Julian tumbled into a deep, hidden ravine. A sharp stake in the pit tore through his shoulder. He huddled in the darkness, shivering, until his eyes met a pair of luminous blue orbs. It was a white wolf cub, already bearing the cold light of a future alpha in its gaze. They watched one another, a silent standoff. The cub had also been impaled by a stake from the trap, its foreleg bleeding steadily. Julian knew his people were searching, but whether they would find him alive or as a frozen corpse was uncertain. The cold was a physical thing, seeping through his ermine-trimmed cloak. After what felt like an eternity, he moved, inching toward the cub. The wolf bared its teeth, a low growl rumbling in its chest. It was a clear, but Julian could see the fear beneath it. It was small and weak, just like him. He extended a tentative hand. The cub snapped, its sharp teeth piercing his palm. He stifled a cry of pain and used his other hand to stroke its head. Once, twice, 3 times. The cub seemed to hesitate, its jaw relaxing slightly. Blood from his hand dripped onto the frozen ground. Seizing the moment, he scooped the cub into his arms. The stake was embedded in its front paw. With a deep breath, he gripped it and pulled. The cub yelped, struggling, and fresh blood welled from the wound, staining its fur and his injured hand. He hushed it, telling it to be calm. He tore a strip from his linen undershirt and clumsily bandaged the paw. The little wolf stared at the bandage, then at him, its struggles ceasing. For the moment, there was peace between them. The waiting was agonizing. Hunger gnawed at them both. He found himself murmuring to the cub, making a bargain with the wild thing. If they were rescued, it would have a home. If they were not, the wolf could have him once he was dead. He stressed that last point, explaining that he was afraid of pain. The cub, as if understanding, suddenly lunged, but not to bite. It began licking his wounded palm. The sharp sting of the bite faded, replaced by a strange warmth. When he pulled his hand back to look, the wound was gone. There was only saliva glistening on his unbroken skin. Stunned, He unwrapped the cub's paw. The small wolf immediately began licking its own injury. Within minutes, the bleeding stopped and the wound closed. It was healed. The cub, now energetic, scrambled up his chest, trying to lick the gash on his shoulder. Julian stopped it, explaining that it was not a place to be licked. The cub seemed annoyed but settled in his lap, a small, living furnace against the biting cold. It was much later when he heard footsteps above. He held his breath, unsure if they belonged to rescuers or assassins. Then voices called his name, the frantic shouts of guards and servants. He had been found. When they lifted him from the ravine, he was clutching a filthy white wolf cub. Caleb was there, armored and leading the search party. He pushed through the crowd and knelt before Julian. He reported his tardiness in the rescue and asked for the king's judgment. Before him was Caleb Thorne in his prime, a celebrated general who held the kingdom's armies in his hand, yet possessed the face of a scholar. Compared to the frail boy king, Caleb was the image of power. Julian, of course, offered no punishment. Caleb was his shield, the only reason his throne was stable. After a few stilted pleasantries, Caleb's eyes fell on the bundle in his arms, asking what it was. Julian simply stated his intention to keep it. No one argued with a king over a pet, but Caleb noted that the creature was filthy. Julian insisted. Caleb did not press the matter, instead handing the cub to a nearby attendant with instructions to have it cleaned and trained, lest it harm the king. As they took it, the cub struggled and bit the attendant, letting out a series of desperate yelps in Julian's direction. Julian reached for it, but Caleb caught his wrist. Him that wild things were difficult to tame. Caleb's gaze then settled on the blood-staining Julian's shoulder, his brow furrowing. He lifted the young king into his arms and carried him back toward the palace. The royal physicians swarmed his chambers, their grave faces suggesting a fatal wound. The assassination attempt sent shockwaves through the court, and Caleb's investigation ended with 2 high-ranking lords losing their heads. Julian, however, got his wolf. It was brought to him clean and white, in a heavy iron cage. The keepers warned that it was feral and had already injured several servants. As Julian approached, they tensed, ready for the wolf to attack. Caleb was not present, nor was the queen mother. No one could stop him. He opened the cage and reached inside. The wolf sprang forward. A maidservant screamed, but it did not attack. It simply licked his hand, a soft whine escaping its throat. Julian smiled faintly, remarking that it was his wolf after all. Once clean, its fur was like fresh snow, its eyes the same mesmerizing blue. It was a purebred, magnificent creature. The royal beast masters could do nothing with it. The wolf, whom he named Finn, recognized Julian alone. To all others, including Caleb, it was relentlessly hostile. Caleb's assessment of the animal was a dismissive 4 words. It was only a beast. But a beast that listened only to him was something Julian found he could not dislike. He decreed that Finn would bear his family name, a move that scandalized the court. How could the royal name be given to an animal? Julian's reply, scribbled on a minister's petition, was that if the king willed it, a man could be a beast too. Caleb saw the note and gently admonished him, suggesting that a king should not be so blunt. Julian asked what his teacher would suggest instead. In private, he still called Caleb teacher. Caleb's response was cold and precise. He said that, for questioning the monarch, the punishment ranged from fines and demotion to execution. Julian laughed, calling him a brilliant man. Caleb's hand came to rest on his chin, his gaze unreadable. He returned the compliment, a strange smile playing on his lips, saying the king was a brilliant man as well. 8 years passed. Behind the palace walls, Julian learned the performance of being a king, a frivolous one. With Caleb managing the state, the kingdom remained stable. The small cub had grown into a formidable wolf, its presence unnerving the staff who cared for it. The few who had tried to poison Finn over the years were now in their graves. After a few such incidents, the attempt stopped. On sleepless nights, Julian would release Finn from his enclosure and let the great wolf sleep at the foot of his bed. The court whispered that he was growing more decadent, preferring the company of a beast to that of a queen. The pressure to marry had been mounting for years, but on this one matter, Caleb remained silent, deflecting any ministers who tried to press the issue through him. One evening, Julian was bathing in the large marble tub in his chambers. The moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating Finn, who sat basking in its glow. Julian leaned back against the edge, his eyes closed. A subtle shift in the air made him open them. He turned. Where his wolf had been, a man now knelt. He was tall, powerfully built, and completely naked. Around his neck, on a simple leather cord, hung the silver tag Julian had given Finn years ago. Most striking were the fluffy white wolf ears atop his head and the long, white tail that lay on the floor behind him. Julian's voice was steady when he called the name, Finn. The man moved instantly, loping toward him on all fours, his movements not yet accustomed to a bipedal form. He knelt at the edge of the tub and, just as he had as a wolf, nuzzled his face against Julian's, his lips brushing his cheek and eyelid. The gesture, so normal from his pet, was startlingly intimate from a man. Julian pulled back. A look of pure, canine hurt appeared in the man's blue eyes. He called his name again, and this time, reached out a wet hand to touch the man's head. The wolf ears were soft and real beneath his fingers. As he stroked them, the man's eyes fluttered shut in contentment. Julian's hand moved to the tail. At his touch, the man's breath hitched. He looked up and saw a flush creeping up the man's neck. Julian asked if he could speak. He asked if he remembered who he was. The man's lips parted. After a moment of strained effort, a deep, resonant voice filled the quiet room with a single word. Master. The title, which Julian had used for himself when speaking to the wolf, felt different now. He asked if the ears and tail could be hidden. After a moment of concentration, they slowly faded from view, leaving a flawlessly formed man. His features were extraordinary, his physique powerful. He was, Julian noted, a specimen of raw, untamed perfection. While the king was lost in thought, the man slid into the water, his body pressing against Julian's with the familiar possessiveness of his wolf. The contact was warm, human. For the first time, Julian struck his beloved wolf, a sharp slap against his chest, before climbing out of the tub and wrapping himself in a robe, leaving the man looking utterly bewildered in the water. A new personal guard appeared at the king's side, and such a change did not go unnoticed. Caleb came to the palace. Now 28, the Lord Regent moved with an even greater air of authority, his handsome face honed by a decade of absolute power. He bowed, offering the customary greeting. Julian, who had been drinking, invited him to rise. Caleb's eyes narrowed slightly as he approached, detecting the scent of wine. He remarked that he had heard the king was refusing his medicine, and reminded him that his health was paramount. Julian dismissed the concern, complaining that the tonics were bitter. Caleb signaled to an attendant. A bowl of dark, pungent liquid was brought forth, along with a small dish of candied fruits. Julian turned his head away. Caleb insisted, his voice firm. The king countered that the regent had never tasted the foul brew. A strange look crossed Caleb's face. He took the bowl himself. He drank a mouthful, his expression unchanging, before setting it down. He stated that it was not so bitter, and now the king could drink it. After a long silence, Julian took the bowl, deliberately placing his lips where Caleb's had been, and drained it in one go. He saw a flicker of something unreadable in Caleb's eyes. The bitterness coated his tongue, and he took a piece of candied fruit. The wine he had drunk earlier began to make his head swim. Caleb then requested a private audience. Julian waved his attendants away. They retreated obediently, but the new guard behind him remained motionless, his face masked, only his eyes visible. Caleb's gaze fixed on him, and he asked coolly if this was the guard with whom the king was rumored to have shared his bath. The court was already awash with rumors. They called the king a deviant, urging him to fill the harem for the good of the realm. The lists of potential brides were already on his desk. Julian turned to the man behind him. "Finn," he said, using the new name he had given him. "You may leave us." The man with the blue eyes hesitated for a moment before obeying. With the room empty, Julian rested his head in his hands. He heard Caleb's footsteps circle the desk. Cold fingers touched the back of his neck, kneading the tense muscles. Caleb asked if he had been sleeping poorly. Julian covered Caleb's hand with his own, turning to meet his gaze. He asked what his teacher would do if he said he had not. Would he, Julian mused aloud, stay in the palace to watch over him as he did when he was a child? Caleb's voice was soft but laced with, telling him not to be foolish. He was a man now, not a boy. The regent could not spend the night. He then changed the subject, inquiring about the new guard. Julian replied casually that he found the man suitable and promoted him, asking if the regent disapproved. Caleb stated that the king's guard should be meticulously vetted, not chosen on a whim. Julian simply agreed that he understood. His sleeve brushed against a stack of papers, sending them scattering. Caleb was faster, bending to retrieve them. They were portraits of young noblewomen. He asked if these were the candidates for the royal selection. Julian confirmed they were, noting their beauty. A heavy silence fell. Caleb asked if he truly intended to choose a queen. Julian affirmed it, saying the queen mother and the ministers were insistent. Caleb gave a short, mirthless laugh. His hand, no longer gentle, gripped Julian's chin, forcing his head up. His voice was low and dangerous, whispering that the king's eyes were far more beautiful than any of theirs. Julian narrowed his eyes, changing the subject to Caleb's own marital status. At 28, why had he not taken a wife? Caleb held his gaze, asking what the king thought. Julian offered to arrange a marriage for him if he had someone in mind. Caleb said the word good 3 times, each clipped and sharp. Then, without another word, he turned and strode from the room, abandoning all pretense of courtly etiquette. In the empty hall, Julian let out a soft, hollow laugh. When he returned to his bedchamber, Finn was already on the bed. He had bathed and changed. As Julian drew near, Finn leaned in to scent him, then wrapped his arms around him in a powerful embrace. He had learned the gesture on his own. Julian pushed him away, telling him to go to his own quarters. Finn looked confused, not understanding why being a man meant he could no longer share a bed. His blue eyes were dark and pleading. Julian, feeling a headache coming on, pinched his cheek. He told him that if he wanted to stay, he would have to learn to serve him properly. He asked if Finn knew what that meant. The man-wolf nodded eagerly, saying he would serve. Julian sighed. He told him to change back into a wolf if he wanted to stay. A moment later, a large, dejected white wolf was curled on the bed. Julian, his head throbbing, lay down and used the warm fur as a pillow. Sometime in the night, he vaguely felt an arm drape over his waist, a warm body pressing against his back. Too tired to fight, he drifted back to sleep. The selection of a queen was postponed. The Minister of Rights, the most vocal proponent of the king's marriage, was suddenly implicated in a massive corruption scandal. His downfall was swift and total, his family's name ruined. But the pressure from the Queen Mother did not cease. She feared the royal line would end with him. What she did not understand was that Julian could not produce an heir. Any child of his would not survive. Trouble was brewing on the northern border. The kingdom's army was soft from decades of peace. Julian, a king with no real military power, felt the weakness of his position keenly. His own health was failing, his mind often clouded and weary. He spent his days in the study, watching Caleb efficiently manage the affairs of state. One afternoon, dizzy with a headache, he remarked that his teacher looked more like a king than he did. Caleb's pen paused. He warned the king to be careful with his words. He then asked why he hadn't seen the white wolf recently. Julian replied that it had been disobedient and was being confined. Caleb's tone was smooth as he offered to take the beast to his own estate for a time, suggesting that 8 years of coddling had failed where discipline might succeed. Julian refused, saying he could not bear to part with it. At that, Caleb turned to face him fully, his gaze intense. He announced that he might soon have to lead the army north. He asked if the king could bear to part with him. Julian was taken aback. He, the king, had not been informed of this. Caleb explained the situation with the northern clans was dire. Julian gave a slight, bitter smile and asked what his teacher would think of him leading the campaign himself. Caleb's reply was a single, sharp word: nonsense. As Julian laughed, a flash of white appeared at the doorway. Finn, in his wolf form, trotted into the room. No one dared stop him. He padded over to Julian and rubbed his head against his leg. Julian stroked the wolf's fur, a triumphant look on his face. "You see?" he said to Caleb. "My wolf is right here." Caleb did not speak, his eyes fixed on the wolf. There was a sudden deep stillness in his expression. He remarked that there was something familiar about the animal's eyes. Julian's expression remained placid. He asked if his teacher had ever seen such a beautiful wolf before. Caleb said nothing more, but his gaze lingered, a silent, unnerving scrutiny. The proposal for the king to lead the army was formally, and absurdly, raised in court. The idea threw the council into chaos. Julian sat on his throne, watching the ministers argue, a picture of regal indifference. His mother, the queen, rushed to see him, her face etched with panic. She begged him not to go. He looked at her, a woman still beautiful but seeming to grow more foolish with each passing year. He asked her why she was not at home, resting. Her face went blank. He told her quietly that he knew her secret. He knew about the child she carried. He advised her to stay in her palace and pray for a daughter. She left in a state of terror. His health continued to decline. The medicine did little to stop the headaches. Finn was a constant, clinging presence. Julian found him irritating but couldn't bring himself to punish him. When he ordered him out, the man would leave, only for a large white wolf to sneak back in moments later, pretending not to understand human words. The matter of the military campaign was settled. Caleb left the capital to oversee flood repairs along the Great River, his absence a tacit approval of Julian's plan. A few loyal old ministers knelt outside the study, begging him to reconsider. Inside, Julian was writing a letter to Caleb. Finn paced restlessly, his eyes on the ink and paper. He finally spoke, saying he wanted to learn to read. Julian asked why. Finn's gaze was intense as he admitted he couldn't understand the letters. Julian smiled, teasingly asking if he wanted to be a man. Finn pressed his face against Julian's, his soft hair brushing the king's cheek. The touch was familiar, but the gaze was not. There was a new, predatory quality to it. He knew Julian was writing to Caleb. He said he recognized the name from seeing it written so often. Finn was clever. He then bluntly stated his dislike for the man and asked if Julian liked him. Julian, feeling weary, simply stroked his face and told him it wasn't his concern. After sending a letter to Caleb filled with cloying sentiment, Julian led the army from the capital. Finn went with him. They were ambushed on the road, a betrayal from within their own ranks. As a sword swung toward him, Finn threw himself in front of Julian, taking the blow. The assassin, a young nobleman, was dispatched by Finn's inhuman strength. But the damage was done. Julian was also wounded in the chaos. The war was won, but the king was carried back to the capital near death. The physicians shook their heads, speaking of a wound that had damaged his core, of a life that would be short even if he survived. That night, in the darkness of his room, a figure entered. It was Finn. He knelt by the bed and began to undo Julian's bandages. Julian felt the agonizing pain of his wound being touched, followed by a wet, warm sensation. He grunted in pain, demanding to know what Finn was doing. In the dim light, he saw the raw hurt in Finn's eyes. He was healing him, he explained. Julian forbade it. It was one thing for a wolf to lick a wound, another for a man. But Finn, for the first time, disobeyed. He held Julian down, whispering that he could feel how weak he was, that he was afraid. He pressed his lips to the wound on Julian's abdomen. The sharp pain vanished, replaced by a healing warmth. When it was done, Finn's gaze was intense. He moved closer and bit Julian's lip softly. He whispered that he had learned how. Learned what? Julian asked, breathless. To serve. When Caleb returned, he found Julian pale and seemingly at death's door. For the first time, Julian saw genuine alarm on the regent's face. Caleb knelt by the bed, his voice tight as he blamed himself for not accompanying him. Julian just smiled weakly, assuring him that the capital was safe only in his hands. While Julian recovered, the Queen Mother gave birth to a son. The infant died within days, mauled by a wild animal. The only free-roaming animal in the palace was Julian's white wolf. The queen, mad with grief, stormed into his chambers and struck him across the face, accusing him of murdering his own half-brother. Julian took the blow, then calmly knelt before her. He told her the truth he had uncovered. Her lover was a commoner named Zhang Qian, a man who already had a wife, 2 children, and 2 pregnant mistresses. Her son had never been his to claim. His mother crumbled, her world destroyed. Caleb visited again. He noted how long it had been since he had seen the king's wolf. He spoke of the beast's wild nature, the danger it posed. He stepped closer, his hand tracing the line of Julian's jaw, complimenting his beauty. The gesture was possessive, a silent assertion of ownership. The emperor, he seemed to say, was his. Not long after, Caleb brought a priest to the palace, claiming a need to cleanse it of an evil presence. The priest declared a demon spirit was masquerading within the walls. It was a test. Caleb suspected. He was closing in on the truth. The night the storm broke, Caleb came with his sword. Rain lashed against the windows. Finn, in his wolf form, was on the bed. He immediately placed himself between Julian and the regent, a low growl in his chest. Caleb's face was a mask of cold fury. He spoke of the rumors of a guard who never left the king's side, of his suspicions, of the demon wolf that had bewitched his king. He raised his sword, declaring he would kill it. Julian stepped in front of Finn, and the sword point grazed his cheek. "Who are you here to kill, Caleb?" he asked softly. "The wolf, or me?" Caleb's resolve seemed to shatter. He sheathed the sword. "Be good, Julian," he whispered. Julian turned and murmured something into Finn's ear. The great wolf looked at him once, then leaped through the open window and vanished into the storm. "Julian!" Caleb's voice was a roar of fury. He grabbed the king, his fingers digging into his arms like talons. He demanded to know if Julian had been sleeping with that man all this time. "He was a man," Caleb snarled, "not a wolf." He was interrogating him, his control finally gone. Julian coughed, the movement aggravating his old wound. He pushed Caleb's hands away and asked the regent what exactly he took him for. That night, a coup erupted. Julian's uncle, the sixth prince, stormed the palace with his private army. But Caleb was already there. He spirited Julian away to a derelict wing as fire and fighting consumed the main palace. He told Julian to wait, that the usurper would be dealt with. He knelt before him, his ambition finally laid bare. He spoke of his victory, of the throne that would soon be his. He took Julian's hand, reminding him of the words in his letters, of his professed affection. He would be king and Julian would be his. Julian looked at the man who had controlled his life for 9 years. "What will I be to you, Caleb?" he asked. "A nameless consort? A plaything locked in the palace?" Caleb's face softened. "You will always be my king," he promised. The words were beautiful. Julian leaned in, his hand tracing the line of Caleb's neck. He could feel the man's pulse quicken. "I do desire you, Caleb," he whispered, and as Caleb's eyes widened in triumph, Julian drove the poisoned dagger hidden in his sleeve deep into his chest. Caleb gasped, stumbling back in disbelief. The doors burst open, but the soldiers who entered were not Caleb's. They were strangers, and they knelt to Julian. Caleb understood then. It had all been a performance. "You have learned well," he rasped. Julian agreed. The regent had taught him to be ruthless, to be patient. For 9 years, he had drunk Caleb's slow-acting poison, bided his time, and moved his own pieces into place. The elite army his father had secretly left him, scattered and hidden, was now reassembled. Caleb wanted the throne and the king. In his greed, he had lost both. He ordered Caleb's body to be treated with honor. The Lord Regent, he would announce, had died a hero, defending his king from traitors. As the chaos subsided, Finn reappeared at his side, pressing the token of command, the tiger tally, back into his hand. In the throne room, Julian faced his uncle. The prince, his sword dripping with blood, pointed it at the young king and sneered that for 9 years, Caleb Thorne had been the true ruler. Now that he was gone, a competent man should take the throne. Julian simply smiled. He clapped his hands. Archers appeared on the balconies, their arrows aimed at the prince and his men. He informed his uncle that the game of kings and usurpers was over. In the years that followed, Julian cleansed the court. The kingdom, under his firm hand, began to heal. He ruled as Caleb had taught him, but with a wisdom the regent never possessed. Finn remained his constant, silent companion. He was officially the captain of the royal guard. One day, Julian caught him secretly adding a drop of blood to his medicinal tonic. He confronted Finn, who confessed that his blood healed faster. Julian took his hand, where a small cut was already closing, and licked the blood away himself. The taste was metallic, vital. That night, Julian asked him what other ways there were to heal. Finn looked at him with his piercing blue eyes. "Serve you," he said. And this time, Julian did not push him away. The whispers at court continued, of the king who would take no queen, who kept a mysterious, watchful guard always at his side. But no one dared question him. They had learned, as Caleb had learned too late, that the boy king he had tried to mold into a puppet had instead become a master of the game.